Hi students, and welcome to the second session for workforce planning. This is the resource support session number 2 and will actually be the final resource support session for workforce planning. We're only going to be running 2 resource support sessions for this subject. There will be a third webinar, which will be the assessment support workshop, which will take you through all of the assessment tasks for the third subject in the diploma, workforce planning. In this session, we'll be taking you through the learning activity called Develop Workforce Objectives and Strategies. You'll notice that there's another activity underneath it called Implement Initiatives to Support Workforce Planning. We'll actually be talking about some of those topics in the next subject, which is Ensure Team Effectiveness. So if you're looking for information that might help you with those ones, 2 places, look in the learning materials and look out for webinars in the next subject, Ensure Team Effectiveness, because all of those questions actually relate to teamwork. Joining me today, we've got Alyssa Katana and we've got Alison Vella. Thank you very much for joining me today, guys.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. It's lovely to be here.
Hi, everyone.
There you are. Okay, so we had a good conversation actually last week, Alison. We talked all about workforce planning. We introduced the subject for students, and just I guess maybe a bit of a recap on what we talked about last week. We gave you the overview. You might remember this image. I'm just about to open it up. You might remember this picture right here, which we talked about the workforce planning cycle and how that works. Last week we talked also about diversity in the workforce. We talked about why it's important to create a diverse working force. We talked about strategies to creating that, and we started talking about culture and how to retain employees, but also a little bit about being an employer of choice. How do you actually create a great working culture? And I think we also talked about exit interviews as well and what the merit is in conducting exit interviews. But just to go back a step, I might just repeat some of the definitions that we rolled out last week, because I think it just helps to sort of paint that picture. So we explained workforce planning as a business-driven and business-owned process. It's about knowing your organization's business and using this knowledge to position your organization's workforce to best deliver your business outcomes and manage workforce-related risks. Another great definition of workforce planning I had here from last week was workforce planning is a core process of human resource management that is shaped by organizational strategy and ensures that the right number of people with the right skills are in the right place at the right time to deliver short and long-term organizational objectives. And I think that's a great explanation, because really it simplifies it. What we're looking at here is a link between the organization's strategy, which we'll talk a little bit about strategic direction and what all that means in a second, and human resource management. So that's what we mean by workforce planning. Planning the people, the human resources. So organizing our workforce, or organizing our staff, organizing our workers for the future to be able to handle what it is that we're trying to do as a business. So what we're trying to achieve strategically. And that's what we mean by ensuring that the right number of people with the right skills are there for us, or are in the right place at the right time. So it's about having a strategy for your workforce that's going to link up with the strategy for the business, so that all things are running nicely together. 2 words that sort of we talked a little bit about last week, Alison, you might remember: capability and capacity. Capability is the abilities, the skills, the knowledge. It's all of those things. Capacity is the volume or the amount of those skills and knowledge. And really that's what workforce planning is about balancing those couple of areas, the capabilities and capacities of your business, and making sure that you've got all of the right capability and capacity to be able to handle whatever the strategic direction of the business is. Alison, did you want to add anything to what, I guess maybe as a recap from what we talked about last week? Anything to do with
we
this?
did. We covered quite a lot, didn't we? Which was great, and we talked about the importance of planning rather than reacting. So actually having plans in place so that you can deal with things before they actually even become an issue. So the whole point of workforce planning is understanding the present so that you can forecast for the future. And we talked about sort of shaping and structuring. What plans do you need to put into place for your business, and what steps do you need to follow? So we talked through briefly those steps as well. So reviewing that business objective and your strategies that you already have in place, and then analysing and forecasting for your labour market, identifying what gaps you can see between your current and your future needs for the business, develop the strategies, and then create your workforce plan and how you're going to monitor and develop it along the way. So we did cover quite a lot of things last week.
Absolutely, and that's what you've actually just talked us through, is the actual cycle itself. So last week we talked about, how do you gather information on your workforce, or what we call profiling the workforce. Forecasting needs is really a bit of a pie in the sky job. It's more or less saying, okay, these are the sort of sales figures we presume. This is an estimation, for want of a better term, of what we think we need to be looking like. It is still a little bit of guesswork, but as you say, it's a process of planning. I mean, if you don't do that, you'll find. And it's a little bit like, we were talking about when you're scoping for a project, when we're talking about project planning, the other subject that we just completed, we talked about that need for preparation, and it's the same thing here. I mean, if we look at the business as a project, then if we don't plan, then we're lining ourselves up to, maybe potentially be unsuccessful, which could have potentially quite dire effects on the entire business. So that was the workforce planning cycle. I'm actually going to open up the next set of questions, which is this one here. And the first question that we've got in this set today, guys, is give two examples of exactly how your business strategy will impact the implementation of a workforce plan. So give two examples of how your business strategy might impact the implementation of a workforce plan. So we're sort of stepping it back a little bit here, because we've given you the high level view of what it looks like. I think it's a good time now to talk a little bit about strategic planning, and the benefits of that and what that's all about, and operational planning, because to me it's sort of there's a real connection between that high level and low level. And strategic planning really is about going, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how are we going to get there? It's blue skying. It's saying, what are the high level goals? What are we trying to achieve as a business? Do we want to move into a new product? Do we want to move into a new market? Do we wish to be the market leaders in our industry? What do we want to be known as? What's our mission? What are we trying to achieve here? And all good businesses will do this process called strategic planning. It's basically goal setting. This is goal setting for businesses. If the business doesn't have a direction, it's really going to struggle to maintain its survival. So some of the benefits of actually strategic planning are an increased chance of survival and prosperity, as well as, it's a leadership thing too. We talk about the need to provide a vision in leadership, and it's such an important thing. For effective teams, and something that we'll talk about in the next subject, but some of the, I guess, attributes of a high-performing team include having a vision. If a team doesn't have a vision or a goal or understand what it's trying to achieve, it's going to really struggle for all the bits, all the parts, all the cogs of the machine to come together and work in unison and work as one. So another benefit of strategic planning is you actually get less infighting and factions within your organization. You're going to actually increase the likelihood of better communication with stakeholders, because you know exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. Yeah, guys, any thoughts on strategic planning?
I think that obviously, as you mentioned before, Adam, I think strategic planning for any organisation is absolutely essential. And, quite often, I have a lot of admiration for the people that can put together a strategy, because a strategy is really about looking at the future and knowing what the future holds so that you can really direct your business towards that future. And it is I think it's a really tough skill to be able to have, you know. I come from a background of hospitality, so, you know, I'm very, very familiar with the operational element and the operational connection between, you know, strategy as well. So I have a lot of respect for that, and it can be quite hard. It requires a lot of knowledge, I think, and really forward planning and being in the loop with what the industry that you're a part of is going to do. And, you know, it is an essential tool when you're looking at something like workforce planning. You need to know what trends are happening. You need to know what's happening with your labour markets. You need to know what's happening with your generations, so you can really plan and you're ahead of the game all the time. So, you know, I think it is an essential tool there, that whole concept of strategy.
Okay, there's a good page for students to check out. Have a look at IWP, Reviewing Business Objectives and Strategies. It talks a little bit about what we're talking about now, strategic, direction, operational goals and things like that. For students, and there's a really good couple of explanations here. We could have gone to that straight away. Strategic planning, as we say, that's the high level. These are the, you know, blue skying. This is ultimately where we'd like to be. What an operational plan is the what we call the low level. This is the day-to-day running. This is the actual how. The strategic plan is like the what. So what are we trying to achieve? The operational plan is more your low level. It's the detail. It's actually how we're actually going to do this. As what's actually written here, it's a subset of the strategic plan and will describe a short-term way of reaching that particular milestone. So it's very, very similar to what we're talking about here in workforce planning, where there is a workforce plan is really like an operational plan, but for our human resources. It's saying, okay, how are we going to make sure that our human resources are lined up with what it is we're trying to achieve? If the two are mismatched, then you're going to find that you're increasing your chance of risk of the actual business being able to be successful in that space. Have you guys been involved in strategic planning at all in business that you've been in?
I think. Sorry, Alison. Go. No, yes.
I have mainly with a business that dealt with apprenticeships and traineeships, which was really quite interesting. We had about 80 different apprentices and trainees across a whole range of different industry types. So very much strategic planning was part of things there, because we would have to actually match the right people to the right industries from our pool of staff and resources. So we had to be really clear on what the business objectives and goals were for the companies that we were actually recruiting these apprentices and trainees for. So we had to be really clear on that. Then we'd have to make sure that we had the right strategies in place to find the right people and make the right matches. We had to know what was going on with the labour market, what was actually happening in our local environment as far as all of those things came into play. So, we had to be aware of things like, vision and mission statements of the organisations that we were working with and things like that. So it became a really big part of what we had to do every day in that particular situation. That was probably a good example.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Alyssa, have you been involved at all in strategic planning days in organisations, things like that?
Oh, I think in a couple of businesses, I've definitely been involved in the whole concept of strategic planning, and I think in my role as a trainer, I feel like I'm more a part of the operational side of helping to achieve that strategy, whereas the business might set a strategy of achieving or kind of increasing a level of service or whatever it may be, and then I've always found myself in that operational role more of the strategic role. I'm probably a bit more in tune with that kind of project-based or activity-based element of business that helps to kind of achieve that strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to sometimes obviously wrap my head around the concept of strategy. I find it very interesting. I find it very, very interesting. I was actually with an organisation a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about strategy, and we were talking about operational departments within that business. And I asked the HR person there, and we were talking about strategy, and he said, you know, I've only got one person in my strategic department, but I've got something like 20 people in my operational department. So I found that really interesting in terms of, you know, what it takes and what kind of mindset it takes in terms of creating strategies. I think but more so always on the operational level, I think, for myself.
Yeah, and look, typically strategic planning has been something that's been done in a boardroom anyway. I mean, it's not something that in the past businesses have wanted to share because they feel this is the most sensitive of information. This is not stuff that we want to be sharing with our staff. Our staff, they don't know what they're really talking about. We're the bosses here. We're the smart people. We're going to be the ones that make up the vision. Interestingly enough, that dynamic has changed in recent years, and what business is starting to recognize are that the people that actually work in their business have some really good ideas, have some great knowledge on
Mm,
how the business is run, and also have some really good ideas about how to shape the future. So good
mm,
businesses now are starting to engage their staff in this process. And their process is actually that happen called continuous improvement. It's a formalized thing that businesses are doing now where they actually have these get-togethers, and they always look to be effectively improving their service or product or the way that they interact with customers on a regular basis. But typically, strategic planning has been something that's been dealt with in the boardroom, but is now something that's been sort of opened up a little bit to be involved. Actually, I used to work for a music publishing company that were quite progressive. The gentleman that ran that business, he was a pretty switched on guy. He ran the business a little bit like a giant family, so he really wanted input from the people that he had working for him. And he used to run a strategic planning day once a year, and that day was run off-site. So he would hire a hotel room, not a hotel room, but like a function room, I should say. And he'd put on food, and he'd take everybody out of the office, put them in front of a new environment, say, okay, guys, don't wear your suits today, just come in your casual gear. Um, and it became a bit of a blue skying session where, you know, when I say blue skying, what we mean by that is a blank canvas. Let's just have a chat. This is what we do right now, but who says we can't do something else? Let's talk about how we can grow the business in this next year or next 5 years. And you know what? I remember even when I was in those sessions, and I remember thinking, I haven't really contributed a whole lot to these sessions, but it felt really good just to feel like I was a part of that. I was included in that meeting. I felt really good that I was a part of it. And, I think it's an important thing. But the reality is that all of the great ideas, and I saw them coming to fruition, did come from other members of the team that each had their own little expertise in a particular area. They would bring something to the table, and that's what was driving the business. But it's really important for business to have a strategy. It's really a core of leadership. If you want to lead a group of people, or if you're a business and you want to lead a group of staff members, you need to show them the way. You need to say, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is our mission. This is our strategic plan. And yeah, look, you were mentioning before, Alison, a little bit about what we call environmental scanning and understanding what's happening out there in the marketplace. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, because that's actually also a big part of the workforce planning cycle. I guess I just want to make sure that we're just going through the questions for students. So let's have a look at this first one. Examples of how your business strategy will impact the implementation of a workforce plan. Do we feel we've given students enough information there to go off and answer this question?
Just trying to
Oh,
think of some examples that we can
yeah. I mean,
sort of, throw in there.
I'm thinking of things like if your business strategy is something like an employer of choice, then say for example you wanted to attract and retain, quality people, then that would probably need to reciprocate down to a workforce plan in terms of the HR function on how to attract
Yep.
those types of candidates moving forward. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, what you're saying is spot
Um,
on, actually. So the next question talks about how does your recruitment process make you bring in the right people for the right roles, and I guess part of how you set your recruitment process is going to impact on what you're talking about. But the reality is with this question is that anything should impact your workforce plan, because what it is you're trying to achieve will determine on how you're going to go about achieving that. So I know that's just a very general comment, but I'm happy for students to provide any example as long as they back it up. So if you say, here's an example, we're going to open up a brand new store. That's an example of a business strategy. We're going to open up a new restaurant as an example. Just explain how that might impact on workforce planning rather than just giving us the strategies. So as long as you sort of, make a general link between what it is you're trying, what it is that the business are trying to do and how that may impact, you might get some more ideas as we continue talking though, in terms of recruitment. So let's have a look at that next question. Question
cool.
2, how does your current recruitment process enable you to make sure that you get the right people for the right roles? I might look for some resource material here. And Alison, I think you had something on this one too, possibly?
Yeah, look, with that one, I'm sort of thinking things like, matching your business culture is really important. So the whole point of this whole thing is, to get the right people for the right roles. It's sort of got to start at the top, considering we are talking about, the whole workforce planning situation here. So what is your business culture? What's your organisation all about, and filtering things down from there. There's a lot of different processes out there. There's one that I actually use occasionally when doing the recruitment selections, so the recruitment selection and induction unit itself.
Yep.
There's a lot of different ones out on the internet that you can actually look up. So if you haven't particularly got a current recruitment process at a place of work that you're really familiar with or that you can get your hands on, go searching for one. And an example is the Australian Red Cross have a really good 8-page document on their recruitment and selection policy, which just sets the whole thing out
Have you got
really
it
well.
there, Alison?
I have, yep. So
Do you
you
mind
want to
if
switch
we...
over to my
I
screen.
was going to say, because we're all looking at my screen now, but I can actually just flip it over to your screen.
Yep.
And I'm just trying to work out how to do that. Change the presenter. Okay, I think that's how we do it. Let's see if this works.
Can you see that document yet?
I can. Okay.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, I just find this a really good one, and it's a company that everybody is fairly familiar with, the Australian Red Cross. So this is their recruitment and selection policy. So, it actually has their policy statement there. So the principles which guide Red Cross include, it sort of starts with that. So this is what we're talking about here is who is the organisation? What do they stand for? What, the who, what, where, when and why of this particular organisation. So it talks about that. Then it goes into the scope. So this policy applies to the Red Cross workforce who undertake recruitment, selection and appointment processes. Then some definitions as you go through, responsibilities, then the actual procedure, step by step. Okay, so what the recruitment activities will involve, who needs to give the approval to recruit, what external recruitment consultants may come into play.
These are the bits and pieces that we're kind of looking for here. So it's exactly what you have in that policy is sort of like a set of road rules for how the business are going to try and attract that talent. Or, these are the ways that the business are. And this is the question, how does your current recruitment process enable you to make sure that you're getting the right people for the right roles? So actually, if you go back to where you were, 5.1.4, I think it was, I could see there it was talking about selection. A lot of this stuff that they put in their policy on selection, these are the ways, I guess, that the company are going to try and make sure that they're getting the right person for the right role. Um, and that might just be a methodology of shortlisting. That might be their methodology of interviewing. How do they interview? Do they ask the same questions of everybody? Do they use different questions for different people? How do they convene a selection committee? Do they have one person on the committee? Do they have five? Do those five people work in the same division? There are all these sort of formulas that will actually try and get that process as good as possible in order to make sure that we're getting the right people in the right roles. How do you cross-check? How do you double-check and see if somebody's got the skill set that's required for that role? So these are all things that you'll find in a recruitment and selection policy. And it's interesting because they quite often call it a recruitment and selection policy. It's not only the the recruitment, but it's the methodology of shortlisting and selecting and doing all of those things. Quite often, these policies also talk about, and I think you mentioned it at the start, Alison, just how we engage with consultants, or how do we advertise, how do we use other people to help us with this. But yeah, like sometimes the policies also talk about what needs to be included in a job ad, or where do we even advertise our roles, typically speaking. What roles do we advertise
And
for?
that can be quite a big one as well, because, and again, that comes back to that strategic planning. You know, who are the organisations? So where do they want to try and source their candidates from? There are some organisations that will only ever advertise in the local newspaper. We just want people from our local community, so they won't even consider putting a job ad out on Seek or on anything that will attract people from other areas. So again,
Yeah.
it comes back to that. What is the strategic plan of the organisation? And then
Yep.
you've got it here in a policy, so it's a black and white document that has the policy that then develops the procedures that must be followed.
Sounds good. I'm going to flick it back to my screen.
Yep.
Okay, so the students should be right to answer that second question. How does your current recruitment process or policy enable you to make sure that you're getting the right people in the right roles? Students, you're more than welcome to answer that from your own perspective as well. So if you know that, okay, where I work, this is how we generally try and bring people in, and the way that we double check that we feel that they're the right, this is how we do it. As long as you're answering that question, we're absolutely happy. But as Alison's pointed out, you going online and having a look for recruitment process or recruitment policy and recruitment and selection policy will give you some great ideas on how organisations can actually, achieve that. Alyssa, did you want to add anything to question 2?
No, I think that, yeah, that was definitely covered in a very extensive, yeah, that's perfect.
Beautiful. Let's have a look at number 3. Describe any policies or procedures that you have implemented to help team members take responsibility for their own work and their own role. So what does a business, what are some examples of things that a business does to make sure that their staff are fully understanding on what it is that they're needing to do? There was a good page that I remember finding. Yeah, job descriptions. So the kind of the obvious one that I think about when it comes to this is things like job description. Job description or position description actually outlines the specific duties, tasks, and activities that the employee is expected to perform. So that's what's to be done, and the standard in which it's there to be done in. So quite often it's one of the first things that you'll see when you're even applying for a job is you get a description of the job. Quite often when you pass through the job interview stage and then you've finally been accepted, or in that process, you'll often get a more detailed job description, which might even break down, what those standards are for that particular job. Also, things like KRAs or KPIs, which is something that pops up and bobs up through the course.
Mm.
So there's definitely that one. The job description is a really good one. You've also got, yeah, having goals in place for your staff as well. So having goals and KPIs and KRAs. But there's also a process, and I think it's something that we'll talk a little bit later in the course, but there's also a process that a lot of organizations undertake, and it's what we call the onboarding process. And that's really a process of helping your employees become, members of your organization. And that will include, orientation programs, so getting them comfortable with the environment, but also getting them socialised and comfortable with what the skill set that they need to learn to execute their job. Um, yeah, induction programs is another name for for the most part what I'm referring to there. There are a couple of ways that you can effectively help your employees.
I think with the induction process as well, sort of, a really good organisation will do a very comprehensive induction and then get you to sign off on it as well and give you lots of material that you've got then at your disposal to use when you're actually performing the job. You're not going to absolutely take in and remember every tiny little detail, but the fact that it's all, you've been told where to find that information. Here is your staff handbook that has absolutely everything in there. We'll talk through the most important points and then get you to actually sign off to say that yes, I was inducted and all of these different items were covered, so I'm now clear on what my responsibilities are, and I take responsibility for it.
Absolutely, but when you say signing off, quite often what they do is they get their staff to actually complete activities. So we will actually get you to complete a module on a computer to demonstrate knowledge, or you'll have to do some sort of task in front of other people to perform that particular skill so that we can observe you performing that particular skill before we send you out on the floor or before we get you out in the field to do that job. I've been part of induction programs as well. They're really fantastic. They're a great way to feel comfortable in an organization. A lot of businesses have a lot of things you have to learn before you start, some far less, but the ones that do have a lot of information that you need to learn prior to starting always do a lot better by having induction programs organized. It just helps guys to get really comfortable. Some facts here are that 22% of staff turnover actually occurs in the first 6 weeks of staff in a new organization. So we know a really large, a quarter of our staff turnover, quarter of the people will leave before 6 weeks is even up. So if we can help them at the start by, giving them information they need, making them feel comfortable, all of those things are actually go down to the next question. We're talking actually now a little bit about some things that'll fit into this question really well. So this question is asking for retention strategies. 5 examples of things an organization might do in an attempt to retain its staff. Well, this is actually a great one. By presenting an induction program to a new staff member, it actually increases the likelihood that that member will be retained. And that's what a retention strategy actually is. Another stat here about, about the induction program or the onboarding process. It says here that 58% are more likely to be within the organization after 3 years. That's huge. So higher likelihood of having long-term staff by having a really well organized induction program. Now, did we talk a little bit
Taking the
about...
guesswork out of it all, aren't you?
Yeah, it does. It does. But you know what? How does it feel like when you start a brand new job? You're so nervous. You've got so many things you're thinking about. What do I have to know? And just having a nice, cruisy way to sort of start. Quite often, what they do is they have keynote speakers on that first day. You turn up. You've got 5 or 10 other people quite often in the same program that you're doing that might be starting on the same day. Because they try and put people together when they're running those programs. It's obviously more cost effective, but you feel instantly more comfortable that there are others that are potentially in your exact situation. Some companies can't put a whole program of 10 or 15 people in the same room together. It might just be yourself. But knowing that they've organized something for you, they don't expect you to be performing on day one. They're happy for you to learn, and it gives you a nice gentle way to learn without feeling the pressure of having to perform from the start. We actually talked about something great last week on this one on retention strategies. We talked about exit interviews and the merit of running exit interviews. It's a method of HR or human resources management. Identifying why employees are leaving a given organization. So understanding the reasons why your employees are leaving is a great strategy for trying to keep them. So you can obviously make some changes that are necessary as a result. Any other...
Even though it may not help you in the short term, it's definitely going to help you in the long term, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, some things might take a little while, especially if it's relating to culture. You know, we talked a little bit about culture and becoming an employee of choice last week. It's not something that can happen overnight. So if you're finding there's a lot of people problems that you're experiencing in an organization, that might be a symptom of much larger problems as well, which might be issues surrounding leadership. It might be, vision of the business, the direction of the business. There might be a number of different factors which are creating factions within departments or people problems, as it were. Not everything can be solved overnight, but you certainly can't solve problems if you're not aware of them, for sure. So exit interviews give organisations a great view as to what's actually happening, what people are feeling about their organisation. You get really honest answers when people are halfway out the door too. There's nothing to lose at that point. But yeah, we talked a little bit about being an organisation of choice. So the things that we talked about last week are actually great retention strategies as well.
So yeah, we did, didn't we? We talked about reward and recognition. What sort of motivation, those sorts of things. So think about companies you've worked for before or who you work for now, and think about what examples they had in those sorts of areas. I've probably mentioned before, I used to work for a manager who used to do just the most amazing things for the staff on a personal level as a way of thanking us for all the hard work. You might have had a really, really bad couple of weeks, where you've worked really, really hard and put your heart and soul into everything, but you haven't got the same bottom line or things happening there. But just the fact that she could see how hard we were working, she'd do something really nice, like organise, okay, you're leaving at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I've booked you in for a massage for an hour, and then you can go home, here's a bottle of wine, off you go, thanks so much for your hard work. So she had some awesome retention strategies. I had one
I'm
manager
not
that
surprised,
I
yeah.
learned so much from, yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, you know what, you think about organizations where you just loved working there, and think about the ones where you know what, you couldn't wait to get out of there quick enough. At that point, make a comparison. What were the things that made you enjoy that workplace? What were the things that made you not enjoy the other workplace? And the things that made you enjoy that workplace, that's an example of a retention strategy, and good organizations will do the things that keep their workers motivated, excited, productive, happy, and ultimately likely to stay for the long term. I did find a page here. It's under the recruitment. It's called succession planning. Now, succession planning is another example of a retention strategy as well. Succession planning refers to the process that ensure that preferred staff will stay with an organisation, and it's done by identifying and developing internal people within the organisation to fill positions. So as positions change over, we have a plan in place to essentially train up, develop, and succeed that particular person. So succession plans are actually great. They're twofold. That one, it's basically it's an insurance policy. It's saying, great, if something happens, we have somebody else that can step into their shoes. One. Secondly, it provides great motivation for other staff members. I mean, if I know that my organisation have taken the time to develop other skills, to put me in line to take on to be ready to take on that promotion, then I'm feeling that my organisation are looking after me well, and I want to hang around as well. So by actually investing in me, investing in my development, that actually it minimizes risks for the organisation, but it also increases my motivation, and therefore increases the likelihood of being able to retain me as a staff member.
Can I just add in a note there as well, just Adam? I was just thinking in terms of generationally too, like currently, the generational gap that we're experiencing in the labour market and the differences in the wants and needs, I think, of potential employees. I think the retention strategies in your organisation, I really believe, have to be nice and tight, and they have to be really catered around to the individuals within an organisation, because we are experiencing people that are coming into workforces that are very hungry for growth and very hungry for development, and they have no hesitancy in leaving if there's a problem now. So obviously that's a big cost to the organisation every time that you do lose a candidate or you lose an employee. So I think if we get the retention strategies right and we've got some good retention concepts within our workplace, I think hopefully they'll factor themselves around generational requirements when it does come to motivating and retaining people. But I think succession planning is a really big player here because especially with the younger people, like I think you've got your millennials that are coming through now, they're very, very inclined to want growth very quickly. So if they can see that there is a succession plan in place and that there is some time there that have been allocated directly towards them, that they can see the growth path, I think that's a really big incentive for them to stay, because they know now that if they don't get it at one organisation, they can hop across to another organisation and get it somewhere else.
It's a really good point.
So I think
Great point.
I think this is a big I think it's a big player here. I think we've got to think about who we've got. I think we've got to think about generationally what they want, and then cater our retention strategies around those, because the cost associated with losing people is just massive.
Alison and I talked last week about culture, and it's like, I mean, if you can define culture, then you're a genius in many ways, because it's really that intangible thing that we're talking about. It's that feeling in the air when you walk into a place. What is that feeling? What's that? And that's what we're talking about when we're talking a little bit about culture. But all of those things that companies do to create that are also building in their own retention strategies in and of themselves. So if they do, actually, Alison, we talked a little bit about things like this last week, maybe end of month drinks or something like that, or socialization activities, or having a social committee, things like that. It just creates an atmosphere or a place where you want to be and be a part of, an atmosphere where you feel like you're included. Leadership is something that we'll talk about, or we talk about right through the course. But interestingly enough, self-disclosure is actually a key leadership skill or trait. So being able to expose yourself a little bit actually helps to develop rapport and build trust between human beings. So the more you sort of show the real person that you are, and the more that others show who they really are, will increase your trust and rapport that you have with those people. And so organizations that have those sort of activities, that really care about those sorts of things, they're more likely to have greater amounts of rapport and trust within their team. And in and of itself, that creates a more enjoyable place to turn up and work. And anything that I think that creates a better place to work is a retention strategy, just by the way that it is.
I absolutely agree with you. And when you start talking about leadership and you start using those words like trust and confidence and self-disclosure and self-awareness, and we start to look at the generations within the culture, and we start to look at where our workforce is going, what their wants and what their needs are. I mean, we describe them very much on an emotional level now, and they want to be a part of something. They want to be connected to a workplace, and this is when we talk about a lot of those concepts now that are coming out of the emotional intelligence concept when it does come to leadership. So, and they all do very much link together, because the direction that we're going in is in that direction, is being a much more emotionally intelligent leader, and understanding the needs of the people that are in your workplace and focusing your policies and processes and strategies around that need.
Absolutely. And I think once upon a time, the managers, or our old leaders in business, and I'll call them managers, were, they were from that old school style where we don't mix with our workers. We're the managers here. We don't mix with them. We tell them what to do. We're not interested in having drinks with them, getting to know them. You don't talk about your personal life. You don't share anything about yourself, because you just don't do that. We're seeing a great shift, and this is the conversation that we're talking about now with leadership. It's one of the key shifts, is that to be able to build greater amounts of trust, to be able to get more out of your team, as it were. You need to be able to share with them so that the communication becomes as strong as it can be. And so, we're seeing a great shift there. And some of the best leaders are the ones that are comfortable in, telling everybody who they are. This is who I am. This is a little bit about me. You've got to keep it above board, so to speak. But
But
if
keep
I
yourself real. Be honest and be genuine about the person that you are, I think. I mean, like I think it's important to be transparent, and it's important to not have, a distinction between you as a manager and, in terms of a team member too. Like I agree with you. I think it's important that we do have that transparency and that honesty, and that genuineness about how we, conduct ourselves as leaders.
hmm,
So I think there's definitely a need for that, I think, in the industry, and I think it's growing. I'm definitely seeing a few changes in terms of some of the industries that I kind of work out of. So,
absolutely, and then look, the I guess the reality is the ones that are doing that are succeeding, and the ones that aren't really developing their staff and caring and being open, and the word is authenticity, being authentic as leaders, are finding that they're having more people problems, and they're not succeeding as well as the others. I think it's a generational thing. You're talking about the millennials there, Alyssa. The reality is that changes. Once upon a time, you took a job and you stayed there for life, and I think
right, exactly right.
that core idea is no longer. I mean, people don't enter a job and think, that's it, this is where I am for the rest of my life. Once upon a time, you were crazy if you left a job. Why would you leave a job? You've spent so long there. Why would you leave? People now see the world as a global marketplace. The world is their oyster. It's no longer just companies in Australia that compete with other companies in Australia. We are now a worldwide marketplace. We have this beautiful thing called the internet, which we're talking to on right now. It means that we can share things, we can communicate with people from all parts of the globe. You need to be able to be doing something different. You need to be able to motivate. You need to be able to be innovative. You really need to be a leader, and to be a leader, you need to be able to be as authentic as you can, have great communication, and all those sort of things. So I think gone are the days where you have managers that don't communicate well to their staff, that don't sometimes expose some of their own weaknesses. And I think that can be something that can endear you to others if you are really authentic and open and honest about who you are and where your skills are. Um, Goes a long way.
Definitely, it does.
Yeah,
Definitely. And
you know,
obviously that leads that to that last question, which I think is talking about turnover, isn't it?
yeah. Do you want to
Mm.
go for that one?
Yes, obviously, look, that's kind of looking at a question. Question 5 says, define what turnover is, and why do organisations need to analyse turnover rates? Is there any information in the resources about turnover?
There very well may be.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you want to have a little look. I tell you what, there's something else that I wanted to talk about, which we'll jump onto in this session. It was actually following on from something that Alison, you were talking about a bit before, which is something called labour forecasting. And I don't know if I've got it in here. Let's have a look. How about that? I was a bit organised. Alice, if you want to have a look for anything relating to turnover while we're doing this, by all means.
Mm.
But something that students will need to do as part of their assessment task when they're doing a workforce plan is just do a very, very basic scan, or labour forecasting is what we're talking about. Um, and this is one of the pieces of the workforce planning puzzle. Having an understanding of what's happening outside of your zone, or what's happening in the labour market, will actually impact the strategies that you put in place to attract that talent. So we had developing strategies and implementing strategies as part of our cycle that will be affected by what's happening in the labour market. So, for example, if we're looking for a particular, very, very niche position, there might be only a very, very small amount of people in the world that actually have the skills to fill that role. It's really important that we have a strategy to get those people, but it's also important that we understand what the demand and supply for any given position that we're hiring is, because it will change our methodology of hiring that person. If we know there are only 10 people in the world that can do the job, a particular job, are we going to put an advertisement in the local newspaper, or are we going to have to come up with a different strategy for how we're going to find those 10 people? And this is, I mean, I guess breaking it down like that, but that's sort of what we're doing. Um, But also a part of forecasting might also be it's something that, or environmental scanning is something that needs to happen also part of the strategic planning process to understand the validity or the merit of what it is you're trying to achieve. But let's just stick to employment forecasting, which is what we're talking about here. You'll see there's a page on employment forecasting, which we're looking at right now. Are we all looking at my screen? We are, I think, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, employment forecasting. There it is, talks about supply and demand. What I want to show the guys is a website called Job Outlook. So if you go to joboutlook.gov.au, you can actually get information. This is an Australian government website, and it gives you a little bit of information on, the job prospects of any given job. So let's have a look and see if we can find an occupation. So guys, give me an occupation we can have a look for.
A travel consultant.
Let's have a look and see what happens. Okay, so we've typed in travel consultant. Job Outlook has picked a occupation for us here called tourism and travel advisors. That sounds about right to us. So let's click on that. What you get is actually it gives you a breakdown. This is actually not a bad website to go to gain information on the working conditions and the tasks and activities of any given occupation as well. Breaks down what might be included in the given occupation. But look, it does also give you examples of weekly earnings and so forth. Where you want to go though is this little tab here called prospects. When we click on prospects, it's going to give us some data on the prospects of future employment for this particular job role. Can you guys see those key indicators there?
Yes.
Okay, so it actually gives you an idea of what the future job openings are actually going to be like. In this case, it's in the middle. That means it's sort of so-so. If it's right at the top end, it means that future job openings they'll be plentiful, which is good. Now we're trying to look at this from the perspective of hiring somebody. So if we're a business and we need to hire tourism and travel advisors because we're branching out our business, we need to start working out our strategy for hiring. It's really important that guys use this website, Job Outlook, to get some information there. You get a whole range of different bits of data there on the future prospects of that particular job. It's great for you if you're also an individual that's looking at for some information on the prospects of a given role, but also as a function of human resource management, we need to understand what the actual supply and demand is when we're looking to fill particular roles as well. Is there anything else you guys would like to add to this one at all?
No, I think that's a great website to use. So, I would suggest that everybody, jump on board that one and have a bit of a play around, even if it's just something that you've thought, oh, I would love to look into doing this job myself, or somebody that's interested. Do a bit of research on it, see what information you can get.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's another great website for students that may not be aware of it, but there's a website that's called the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It also shows trends, so it gives you trends on, the labour trends, so employment rates and other things too. But it also has, it's actually worth just having a bit of a look around and seeing what's on the actual site itself. But also gives you some statistical data that might help you shape whatever it is you're trying to work out. When we're looking into the future, we need to use anything that we can use to help us with our ideas. So whether we're doing our blue skying, our strategic direction, we need to use some external information to help us understand what the trends are, or what's actually happening out there. But yeah, there's a lot of data in the Australian Bureau of Statistics on labour force trends, and also on things like disposable income, household income, things like that too. You guys familiar with this ABS website?
Yeah, I use it occasionally when you absolutely have to find some statistics or a little bit of information. It's not sort of one of my favourite sites to have to research, but it gets the job done. It does have that information on the labour markets, definitely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. If you're very analytical and you like some numbers and some data, I guess this is definitely the website that you need to go to.
Yeah. Another tool for people is to do things, for organizations is to do things like a SWOT analysis or a PEST analysis. I think this is stuff that we've talked about before. Now, the SWOT analysis really is an internal and external look at what we do. So SWOT being strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what SWOT stands for. It's an acronym. Strengths are internal. These are our positive things. Weaknesses are also internal. The ones up the top here, opportunities and threats, they are external. So what are the opportunities that are outside of the business? What are the threats outside of the business? These are things that you really probably more connected to what we were talking about at the start of the session in terms of when you are doing strategic planning. This is I guess a sort of a risk management technique. Yeah, so just sort of understanding the environment that you're in. A SWOT analysis is a great way of looking at your internal and external factors that might be of interest when you're weighing up whatever you're weighing up. Also a PEST analysis, which stands for political, economical, social, and technological factors. It's a methodology. It's like SWOT, but it's using 4 different categories. It's another method of really just understanding the different aspects, political aspects or economical, social aspects, which might include things like cultural aspects, and how that might impact on your strategic direction, or how that might impact on the way that you're recruiting or your workforce planning strategies. The reality is all of these subjects do link up at some point. They're not individual silos. It's sort of hard to talk about workforce planning without talking about risk management. It's hard to talk about workforce planning without talking about recruitment. It's hard talking about workforce planning without talking about operational planning. So you'll see that everything sort of links up, and we've even spent a bit of the time talking about leadership skill, and everything always finds its way to kind of to link up there. Yeah, Alyssa, turnover. Why do organizations need to analyze turnover rates?
Why do we need to organise? Why do we need? So obviously, I was just having a quick look at the material. I couldn't seem to find anything that specifically defined turnover in the actual learning material itself. So I guess if we look at what turnover could be, I mean, I always think of turnover as probably a percentage of the people that leave the organisation and that are replaced, essentially. Oh, there, you've got it there. What does it say with?
Sorry.
Is there a definition in there?
I'm just looking to see if there's a particular page. I think, you know what, the reality is it looks like it's just sort of scattered through the you know,
Yeah.
there's information in the exit interviews. There's information there
Yeah.
on morale and retention. There's information
Yeah.
on, you know, employment forecasting, which is what we were talking about. So understanding your own turnover rates might actually impact on what you need to, your strategies for when you're forecasting for the future. So it's a little bit of everything, but it's also a little bit
Yeah.
about what,
And
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and you've obviously got to, I mean, I think that obviously turnover is essentially really important. If we're talking about things like trends in the workplace and the workforce, and we're looking at managing workforce planning, I mean, I think it's important to understand why people leave your organisation. I mean, there could be, you know, consistent reasons as to why people are leaving. I mean, so it is important to make sure that you are constantly measuring your turnover. And I know being in hospitality for such a long period of time, you know, turnover was always a very, very big KPI for us. I mean, it was something that never was not discussed at a weekly meeting. So it is a very powerful tool because we need to know why people are leaving. We need to know the reasons behind that. We need to find trends in that. And essentially, every time somebody does leave the organisation, it does cost us money when they leave because they're leaving us with a lot of intellectual knowledge, and we've spent a lot of time and a lot of money getting them to where they are, and now we have to replace somebody, and the cost of replacing them is actually quite expensive. And you know, if we go back to things like retention strategy, then we can obviously minimise our turnover if we've got great retention strategies. And I noticed you were talking about things like exit interviews.
Yep.
You know, previously we need to find out why people leave. And if we can find out why people leave, then perhaps in our retention strategies we can implement ideas that will help retain them, that will essentially reduce our turnover, which is ideally what we need to do.
I think you've absolutely
Some of
nailed
the
it.
factors some of the factors that really need to be considered when you are analysing your turnover rate. So if you've got high staff turnover, you need to think about, I think, things like was it unavoidable turnover? So was there factors like illness, transfers, an ageing workforce? A lot of people retired in a short period of time, things like that. So was it unavoidable, or on the other side, was it avoidable turnover? So were there things that could have been influenced by, human resource practices being improved, change up that recruitment selection and that induction session, as we said before? Or what about the turnover quality as opposed to the quantity? Are you actually losing good employees, or people at the other end of the spectrum? So I think some of those factors are the really important things that need to be taken into consideration when you're doing that analysis.
What you're saying is
And I
taking
also
it even further. I mean, you're saying not only the amount, we're saying who are the people going? Is it these people, or is it those? Is it people that have been in the organisation for a short time that are leaving, or is it the other side? And that'll actually change the way that we go about trying to retain them. That's fantastic. Sorry, Alyssa, I think I interrupted you.
Yeah, and I was also just going to stem on for what Alison was saying as well. I think it's a trend in some industries to have I think it's important to kind of contextualise your turnover in terms of the industry that you're in, because traditionally there are industries out there that have a high turnover. So really knowing what your industry is doing in terms of that, I really think is also an important factor. I mean, as I mentioned, hospitality has a very traditionally high level of turnover because of the type of work, the casual nature of the employment and the labour market within it. So I think it's important to know where you stand in terms of your industry standards as well.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. And another aspect that you might also investigate, is it a seasonal thing? Are we losing people in summer? Why are they happy to stay here in winter, but they're leaving in summer? There might be other factors that you'll discover just by doing that analysis. So, but I think you nailed it before, Alyssa. You talked about money. I mean, at the end of the day, it costs a lot to recruit people. We need to actually try and minimize our costs, or our cost of business,
Mm.
by retaining good people. And generally speaking, people that have been around the organisation for a while have a care and have great knowledge of the processes and how the business operates. Therefore, should be in a better position to offer great service to customers. So it's usually a win-win.
I just I remember a few years back we had a chef, right? So and he was a sous chef, and just for the purposes of say for example here, say he was on $50,000 and he came to us and he had asked for a $5,000 increase, okay, in his wages, in his salary. It was highly skilled. At the time, there was a shortage of chefs in the industry, and so HR went through the process of looking at seeing whether or not we could increase his salary through discussions with the executive chef and the general manager. Anyway, in the end, we had to decline. So he didn't get his $5,000 increase, so he left us. Okay.
Hmm.
Then the director at the time did a return on investment, and she calculated how much it cost for him to leave us. So
Yeah.
how much it cost for him to leave us was something like $44,000. Yet all we had to do was to keep him was pay $5,000. So the
Hmm.
amount of time, amount of training, and what we had offered him, and how much he had contributed to, our customer service levels, all of those things were calculated, and we lost so much more money had we have kept him. It would have only cost us $5,000. So I think we don't really understand from a business perspective how much it truly can cost when
It's
people leave our
it's
organisation.
very hard to qualify how much anything, or quantify how much that would
Oh,
actually cost, because
yeah.
what's the there's two sides of every story. I used to work for an employee who used to say, Adam, I don't negotiate wages with anybody. That's my rule.
Yep.
And the reason for that is that I do not ever want to have a situation where somebody feels that, hang on, he's getting paid more than me.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you've got you've got other problems that can stem from that. So he says, okay, here's what I do. And he's very transparent about it. He says, guys, this is what I do. Every year, I research the industry award rates for the job that you're doing. And I say, cool, I'm going to pay you 5% more or 7% more or whatever his justification. He'll say, you know what, I will pay just above the industry average. I want good staff members. I want great people working here. But what I don't do is I don't negotiate wages with people because that actually creates a culture that I don't that I can't support. So it's an interesting conversation because there's
Oh,
multiple levels to it as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I think that at that time we weren't paying industry levels of pay. It was obvious that at the time we were a bit down, but this guy really wanted to stay. He loved where he worked, but it was a money thing. That was what his need was, and that was what his want was. And he proposed to us, that the industry standard is this. Can you pay me this? And we chose not to pay. So I
Mm,
think from a business perspective, we lost out on a great worker, somebody that was passionate, creative, loved what they did, and was so good at it, all because, all because I think we didn't calculate or think about that long-term cost to us, which I think is quite, it's quite sad, So
I
if you can find, yeah.
I actually before I keep talking over you guys, Alison, did you want to join in on this one at all?
Oh, look, I think you've given some absolutely awesome examples there, and that's, yeah, it always, we're talking about business here,
Mm,
and so, it comes down to the dollars, doesn't it? So,
absolutely.
factoring that in is so important.
Absolutely, but look, I think a good message for students is, we all want a little bit more in our pay packet. We all want to be treated with respect. We all want to feel like we're earning what we deserve. Um, one little point for students when they're considering this, or they might find themselves in a situation or have been in a situation similar to the one you just described there, Alyssa. People enter a negotiation the wrong way around. Okay, so a negotiation is all about win-win. It is all about creating a situation where everybody's happy. Now, typically, what happens, and this is probably what happened with this gentleman that you're referring to, um, Alyssa, is that the guy, sorry if it's a guy, maybe it's a gal, this given individual has walked into this meeting and said, look, I want an extra $5,000 in my pay packet. And they probably said, okay, um, sure, why, why? And he said, I probably said, look, I think I just deserve it. Look at all the things that I've done. Look at all these things that I have done.
And look at what the industry is currently paying.
Well, that would be another look. That's a different argument. I mean, if the organisation are playing way unders, then it's not a bad thing to point out what the industry awards are and just say, look, I'm only interested in the industry standards. But if you're looking for something a little bit extra, you need to enter a negotiation with something to give. And everybody goes into a negotiation with hoping to get something out of it, and more often than not, they're going to come out empty-handed. And you know what? The reality that this guy or gal, so I'm not sure which way, but it was a guy. Your example, Alyssa, yes,
It was gentlemen. Yep.
it was a gentleman. Okay, so this gentleman, if you walk into that situation asking for 5 grand, honestly believing that you're worth that 5 grand, and they say no, it is the biggest kick in the guts you could ever experience. You could walk out of that meeting with your tail between your legs. He may not wanted to actually have left at all. He might have just felt so strongly about that when they said no to him, he just felt he was just so aggravated and angry by the whole situation, he couldn't actually stay there. So he might have painted himself into a position he never even wanted to be in. He actually didn't really want to leave, but he did want a little bit more. You've got to enter those negotiations with something to offer. You've got to enter a negotiation with the win-win mentality. So I'm trying, and how to do that is to say, okay, Mr. Boss, um, I'd like a little bit of extra something in my pay packet at the end of the month. Here is what I'm going to do, and here's what I can provide the business. Here's what I would like to do going forward as a trade-off. And that is the way that you enter a negotiation. No business will just give you money because of what you've done prior to, because they've already costed for or accounted for that. It's been part of their budget. They've already worked through that they've already costed that amount. You've done it. You've worked over and above. That's great. We really like you. We're appreciative of the work that you've done. We've said thank you, blah blah blah. We've given you rewards, all of these sorts of things. You want an extra $5,000. That's great, but I can't pay you $5,000 more, because then guess what? Every single other person in the business is going to walk in asking for $5,000. If you come to me with a proposition and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I want an extra $5,000 in my paycheck, but here's how I'm actually going to achieve it, or here's how I'm going to increase profitability for the business, or here's what I'm prepared to do to earn those extra few bucks. And then it becomes a simple, question of, can we make a few extra bucks out of it? Businesses are always interested in making money. So if you can help a business to make a few extra dollars, you'll have them on side for sure. But always enter a negotiation with something to offer, not something that you're expecting in return, because otherwise you'll find it's a very difficult process of negotiation. So yeah, I think we've exhausted this subject, guys. Anything else you guys would like to add at all to this one?
I think we have covered a lot today. That's great.
Yeah, so that's the last one for workforce planning. We've tried to just jam all the workforce planning subjects together. As I mentioned, there's one last activity, but we'll roll that into next subject, which is ensure team effectiveness, which will be a little bit of a bigger one. So we'll talk a little bit more about teamwork and a lot of the leadership characteristics and what makes great teams in that next subject. But actually, we do have one more session for workforce planning students. That'll be next week, which will be the assessment support workshop. There are a couple of assessment tasks, some really nice ones actually for this particular subject. We'll take you through those couple of assessment tasks next time round, or in the next workshop, which will be our assessment support workshop, and the third and final webinar for workforce planning students. Thanks very much for your attendance. Thanks very much for checking out this video. Alison and Alyssa, thank you very much for your contributions today. It was wonderful.
Thanks, guys. Catch up again next week.
Yeah, see you everybody. Bye-bye.